Please join as we pledge allegiance to our flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now I'd like to introduce Carrie Hooks, Navy veteran, who will sing the National Anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ready, cut, right, face, forward, right.
All right, let's hear it one more time from Marysville Culture. Our dinner is about to be served. So, at the end of it all, I had one final item before my time, and that was a TV VCR combo that they wanted to auction off. And they said, do I hear $20? And of course, there's only 5 people in the room left at this point. And they didn't hear $20. They said, how about 15? And then the guy got a kind of sad look on his face. He said, how about 10? And then he didn't even say, how about? He just said, 5? Maybe a buck? Anything? And will somebody take it home? Will any of you take it home so we don't have to pay to dump it? Okay. I'd now like to welcome our keynote speaker. And then I realized that there was only the people that were left were the 2 Democrats from Whidbey Island, my wife, and 4 members of the cleanup crew, and the guy that just called me up. So it was another humbling moment. And no, I did not subject them to the full 15-minute speech. All right, your dessert menu envelope should be closing up. We will have people walking around to each table to collect the dessert auction envelopes, and we will be counting the money so that we can have dessert served on time. I've been very pleased and very fortunate to hear the Lincoln Day speech of Bill Bryant, Seattle Port Commissioner. He does a tremendous job, enthusiastic, and truly honoring of Lincoln's spirit, which is what this evening's all about. Please welcome Teleport Commissioner Bill Bryant.
Well, this is a lot of fun. See if I can figure this out. There we go. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of the Lincoln Day celebration. You know, it's entirely appropriate that we gather to honor Abraham Lincoln. He's the founder of our party, and he saved the Republic and American liberty. And not just for us, but for all mankind. And he made it very clear that's what he was doing at Gettysburg. Before Gettysburg, if you ask somebody on the street, what is the document that defines the United States, what do you think they would say? The Constitution. But at Gettysburg, the President reminds us that while the Constitution is a divinely inspired document, it's really our owner's manual on how the Republic is to be run. And that it's the Declaration of Independence that defines our soul. What are the first few words of the Gettysburg Address? 407 years ago. 407 years before the President stood in Gettysburg to commemorate the battlefield was not 1789, the year of our Constitution. 407 years before the President's speech was 1776, the year of our Declaration of Independence. A document that says we are endowed by our Creator, by God, not the state, with unalienable rights. Among these rights are liberty. We hear a lot about American liberty these days. What I would like to do is to share with you 4 stories that take place on 4 continents over 4 different decades that make clear how precious American liberty really is. And since it is 4 stories, we're going to have to move pretty quickly. So the first story takes place in the 1970s in Brazil. And in the 1970s in Brazil, the country is run by a dictatorship. And on this particular day, there's a 16-year-old kid who wants to go visit a friend in a neighboring town. And so he gets on the bus, goes to visit his friend in the neighboring town. The bus pulls out of his town and gets on the highway. And a little ways down the highway, the bus is flagged over. And a bunch of guys with machine guns get on the bus, and they begin walking down the middle of the aisle. And they ask everybody to see their national ID card, and they ask them where they've come from and where they're going and why. And on this particular day, this one 16-year-old kid comes this close to telling them where they can put the ID card. But I didn't, because they have machine guns. But I'll tell you, that night I went home and I was furious, and over dinner I talked about how this is no way to treat anybody. This is not how we treat the United States, so you should not be treated this way in Brazil, and you should not treat anyone that way. And I was going to talk about it the next day in my social studies class. And I was told under no uncertain terms I wasn't going to mention this in my social studies class. Because the dictatorship appointed who taught social studies in the schools, and those teachers kept track of what students said what. And in the 1970s in Brazil, students could disappear. That helps me thank God that I live in a country where we are protected from unwarranted search and seizure, and where we have the freedom of speech. Second story takes place in the 1980s. I went back to school, I studied China and Brazil. Of course, I lived in Brazil, but I couldn't get into China because in the 1980s, China was still very much behind the Iron Curtain. And as Americans, you could get in as an approved tour group, but you couldn't get in as an individual, really. But I found there was this one kind of sketchy place in Hong Kong where if you went there and you gave them your passport and $50 and came back 3 days later, they'd have a stamp in there that let you get into communist China. And I gave it a try, and I found myself literally on a night boat to Guangzhou and spent about 4.5 months backpacking along through China and Tibet, when China was very much an Orwellian, totalitarian country. And about 4 or 5 weeks into this trip, I was way in western China, kind of on the edge of where the mountains are before you go up to Tibet. And I was in a very remote little town that had not changed much since the 1700s. It was still literally behind a stone wall. And when you got inside the city, most of the streets were still cobbled and a lot of the homes were still made out of cobblestones. This place had not changed in a long, long time. And somehow I found a bike, because I remember I was biking along, and I looked down at the bottom of the little path there, or alleyway, and scratched on a little piece of wood in English, and just scratched on it, was the words Catholic Church, and a little arrow pointing. I'm Catholic. And I've been in China for about 5 or 6 weeks at this point, and I hadn't been to Mass. So I followed the sign, and a little while later there's another one and another one. And eventually I pull into a courtyard of what was at one time a Ming Dynasty temple, but there was a crucifix on top. And I look over to the side, and there is an elderly, skeletal man who's putting together gardens that you could tell at one time had been beautiful, but had been reduced to dust. And I went over and talked to him, and I found out that he was the priest. And so in talking to him, he said he was going to say Mass in a few minutes, and did I want to stick around for Mass? I said, of course. So I go in and sit down in the pew, and a little while later, he comes out, and he has his back to me the entire time, and he's mumbling in Latin. And I realized this was not any Mass I grew up with. And then I realized this man has had no contact with Rome since 1949, when the communists took over. He doesn't know how much the church has changed. After the Mass, I went back out and we were chatting a little while in the courtyard. And I realized that he had only returned to his church a few months before. That for the 10 years prior to that, he had been working in a rock quarry and essentially a labor camp because he would not renounce his faith. And after 10 years of labor, they finally let him go, and he went back to his church and began putting it back together, and every day said Mass alone. And I thank God, ladies and gentlemen, we live in a country where we have the freedom of religion, and the state cannot tell us what to believe or not to believe. My third story takes place in the 1990s, and it's in Geneva. I lived in Yakima. I did a lot of the trade negotiations for the apple industry. In 1992, Barbara and I moved over to Seattle to set up my company doing trade negotiations, and this was like a year or two later. It was my first big business trip on my own, not a business trip, but the first one for the company, and I'm in Geneva for a client, and I look up a friend who was living in Geneva by chance, and we go out and have a beer, and I'm all excited about this new company I'm setting up. And he's telling me about a friend of his who's Swiss, who lives in a town somewhere near Geneva, and this friend is trying to set up a company. But his friend apparently lives in a city where in order to get a business license, you had to go before the city council and convince them you wouldn't fail. Not something I'd want to do in Seattle, the city council. But you had to convince them that you wouldn't fail. Well, I can tell you that over the last 25 years or so, my company's grown where we have operations in about 40 countries at any given time. We have offices in Seattle and Sacramento. That kid, he never got a chance. And that's why we should all be thankful we live in a country where we have the freedom to fail. Because if you do not have the freedom to fail, there can be no opportunity to succeed. Years ago, or 2 or 3 years ago, I got a call from the Navy, and they asked me if I could be down in San Diego in a week and a half, and I said sure, and I flew down to San Diego and went over to the Naval Air Base and got on a plane and found myself flying out over the Pacific Ocean where I was going to land on the USS Carl Vinson aircraft carrier. And spend 2 days with the crew and the officers from Washington State. And I gotta tell you, I love roller coasters. But there is no roller coaster in the world that can compare to being up here, flying out over the Pacific and seeing a little tiny black speck way over there and all that blue, and being up here and you're seeing, kind of looking at that little speck, and then boom, you're on the deck of the USS Carl Vinson. Your stomach is still back up here. That's fun. What is incredibly fun as well is being in the aircraft carrier, in the airplane on your way home. And you're sitting there and you're feeling the energy build, and you're feeling the energy build, and the energy's building, and the energy's building, and the energy, like, boom! In under a second, you're going on a few hundred miles an hour and you're gone. And your stomach's still back on the USS Providence. But I'll tell you, when I think back on those 2 days, as much fun as all that was, landing and taking off, what really struck me and can even get my throat to knot up a bit is talking to those officers and crew from Washington State and just listening to their stories and just feeling their total commitment to their mission, which is defending American liberty. Gettysburg, Lincoln knew that this was about American liberty. Historians have said that the Gettysburg Address is Lincoln's message to his fellow people and also his message to the future, us. It was his message to his fellow citizens because he had to explain to the country why 50,000 men and boys had to die over 3 days. And he had to explain why they had to give the last full measure of devotion in order to keep American liberty alive. But it's also Lincoln's message to the future, us, that this is about keeping liberty alive for all mankind. And he makes that incredibly clear at the very last minute. Right before going up on the stage, he crosses off one word. Does anybody know what that word is? The word is this. And crossing it off changed everything. Because before, the original draft, what he was going to say was that 50,000 men and boys had to give the last full measure of devotion in order that this government would endure, meaning the American government. And at the last minute, he crosses off this. And he talks about how these men and boys had to give the last full measure of devotion so that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Lincoln was telling all of us that we have an obligation to defend American liberty for ourselves and for mankind. And I would just ask all of you to join me tonight and each in our own way defend American liberty. God bless you all. God bless this great state of Washington.
Just the other day when I had Bill on my show for the first time, one of his people got a hold of one of my people. Well, I only have one person and they're part-time, but he did send an email. And I said, yeah, Bill's an interesting guy, let's have him on the show. So he comes in and he wants to talk about regulatory burdens, always an exciting topic in the morning for the news. And he says, I don't know what we're going to talk about. There's a lot of regulatory burden out there, it's a tough thing. So I thought, well, it doesn't matter. You know, he made it, it was okay. He was still an interesting guy. And then I heard the speech for the first time and I walked up to Bill and I said, let me get this straight. You were a kid on a bus with machine guns pointed at you and you thought, no, I want to talk about regulatory burdens instead. You were a guy hiking through communist China when nobody was allowed to hike through communist China and you didn't think that that might be relevant to mention on the conservative talk station. Unbelievable. But a great speech, Bill. Really, really good. I want to call your attention to the middle of your table. There is an initiative. There are certain words you're not supposed to use to describe Hillary. Now, it's not uncommon for me to have to tell conservative guests that there are certain words I don't want you to use when describing Hillary. But in this case, they were emailing the New York Times reporter words like disingenuous, words like entitled, words like calculating. Those are all sexist terms. So they would be watching and listening and protesting if they caught anybody observing Hillary Clinton saying one of about 10 different words. And those were very obvious. I mean, these are things that define Hillary to a T, of course. But she was trying to self-define and make sure that this is kind of typical of the left nowadays when they're taking someone on. It's not so much that they want to have a debate as it is they want to preempt the debate by labeling whomever it is that they're speaking to. When I was asked to come back for the Snohomish County's Lincoln Day dinner, I think it was it Georgine that gave me a call, or was it Billy? I can't recall now. Probably both. But they asked if I would be here again, and I was thinking, oh, I don't know. And then I was thinking about it, and I thought, you know, there's an opportunity to be in the room with someone who's had a very powerful voice in America and somebody who's been willing to put themselves at great risk for the American public. And then I found out Brian Williams wasn't coming, so I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I was still to agree to be here or not. But then I heard it was Alan West, so I thought, yeah, I can have that. I'll be hearing from him fairly shortly. But I'm going to find out about the dessert dash. I want you to visit around the table. I'll get a count going, then we'll get the dessert going, and then we'll get the main attraction going. But there's one rule, and that rule is, I know everybody's here for Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. Am I right? Yeah. That's what I thought. But we also have just 4 or 5, I can't remember offhand, 4 or 5 live auction items after Colonel West's speech. I just asked, if you stay for the Colonel, you gotta stay for those too. Otherwise, it defeats the whole point of raising money for Republicans out there. So be ready for that. All right, enjoy yourselves. I'm gonna check in on the dessert dash and we'll be right back with you. $700. It is, hopefully, hey, no dessert dashing early over there. Look at him, behind it. I see him. Go getting in line. Table number 7. Table number 7. Who's not dashing? Who's dashing? There we go. In second place with $377 is table number 9. Table number 9. In third place with $340, table number 19. In fourth place with $240 is 350. Not according to this fine dessert dash winning lineup. It was probably a fraud given to me by probably table number 9. All right, here's what's going to happen. Because you look like a trustworthy guy. Of course, my eyesight's diminishing, so if I look out of this eye, real blurry. This eye, you're looking pretty clear. Both of them are just kind of moderately so. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to call out the 4th place. It's according to my official sheet. As soon as I do, I will make an executive call. Now you're just bragging. I'll make an executive call, and you guys get out the dash at the same time. Okay? Well, actually, give it 2-second roll. I'll give you the dash. Ready? Table number 4 officially. Table number 34. Table number 34.
That's what I heard.
1 1,000, 2 1,000. Table number 31. Make a dash for it.
I guess we're going to nominate Alex.
And now, I have been told, I'm authorized to say that the rest of the tables were, in essence, close enough to being a tie. So all the rest of you have to stand out there. don't seem to have a vision for the kind of dangers the world faces, not just now, but in a few years from now, as these winds continue to blow and gather force and gather consequence. And so you look around and you look for people that you can have confidence in to lead. You look for people who know what evil looks like, and they have the moral and physical courage to confront it. So when I first read of Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, I thought, wow, that is a man. And I thought, that is a man of honor. And I was moved, and I was frustrated, as I'm sure many of you were, for the exit from the military. We won't get into that. I was very pleased to see Lieutenant Colonel Allen West make it to Congress, and I was especially pleased to see how much it dissatisfied certain people that he was in Congress. I have a complete biography that lists the accomplishments of Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, but I'm not going to share it. You know that he is a combat veteran, that he is a decorated soldier. You know what kind of man he is because I saw it in the fact that as soon as he walked into the room, every person in this room stood up and applauded. So let's do it one more time and welcome Lieutenant Colonel Allen West.
This is it. And who came up with that fancy, we're going to run an inside play and let some free agent pick the ball off? And I tell you what, I guess I don't have to wear a Seahawks hat this time for the Hawks to do it. Next year, okay? And do y'all play the Atlanta Falcons next year? The other birds? Who said it was you? But let me tell you something. It is very easy for me to stand up here as the president and CEO of the National Center for Policy Analysis, a 31-year-old conservative free market think tank, and I can talk to you about tax policy. I can talk about why the progressive tax system with 7 different tax brackets is destroying the economy of the United States of America. How we maybe probably should go to a flat tax, a bifurcated flat tax, or 2 different brackets, so that we can get economic growth, and we can get rid of a lot of these deductions and exemptions in the personal income tax code. I can talk about how that will stimulate small business growth. I can talk about how we need to bring the corporate business tax rate, the highest in the United States and the world, at 39.6%, down to something maybe 25%, a little bit less, so we can once again get trillions of dollars of capital back in the United States of America. I can talk about the regulatory burden. I can talk about how the federal government needs to move away from baseline budgeting, which means that every year there is an increase of spending. When they talk about cutting spending, they're only talking about cutting the rate of the increase, not truly what they should be doing, which is a zero-based budget, which is what most of our states are doing so that they can balance their budget. Talk about the monetary policy that is so failing. The fact that one person by the name of Janet Yellen is the determinant of what is happening in our economy right now. Because if our economy was truly strong, we could take a 1 to 2% increase in interest rates. But when we're keeping interest rates this low, that means you have an artificial economy. And if you continue to print $50 to $65 billion a month, then you have Wall Street and you have crony capitalism because people are hooked on the crack cocaine of the largesse of the public treasury. We talk about why we should be producing, consuming, and exporting all of our energy resources and how energy resourcing is a key and vital part of the 21st century battlefield. That's what keeps OPEC afloat. That's what keeps Vladimir Putin afloat. I can talk about how we should not be sitting down and talking about a deal with the #1 sponsor of Islamic terrorism in the world. I can discuss why we should not be decimating our military forces. And then speaking about our military forces, Miss Endicott was sitting there with me. And she was whispering in my ear about, well, not like that. Get your mind out of the gutter.
Jealous, Irene.
But she was whispering in my ear about someone that can't be here tonight. And this is what we do need to talk about starting off. Her husband, Pacific Theater, 33rd Infantry Division, part of the liberation of Luzon. And so what I'd like to have, if there are any World War II veterans, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines here tonight, please stand and let us recognize that greatest generation. If there are any World War II veterans, please stand. That should tell you something. About 5 years ago, we lost our last World War I veteran, Frank Buckles. We're losing our World War II veterans each and every day. That's why the honor flights are so important. If there are Korean War veterans that are here, Army, Navy. If there are Vietnam War veterans, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, please stand. And I want to say Desert Shield and Desert Storm, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, please stand and let us recognize you. If there are veterans here from Somalia, Iraq, and Afghanistan, please stand so each and every one of us can recognize you. Soldiers, we're living in a time when our United States Army is now at 1939 pre-conscription levels. We're living in a time when our United States Navy is at 1917 levels. We're living in a time when our Marine Corps is at World War I levels. Our Air Force is the smallest and oldest fleet that we have ever seen since we created the modern United States Air Force. That is why we see the rise of Islamic totalitarianism, jihadism, and terrorism. That is why we see Vladimir Putin making his incursions to take the Crimea, to take the Ukraine, threatening the Baltic states, threatening Denmark, threatening Europe. That is why we see a China that is growing and expanding and seeking to extend their regional hegemonic dominance. A China that has now built their first aircraft carrier. A China that now has a missile that can take out American aircraft carriers. And I think that's pretty important for the folks here on the West Coast where the Pacific Fleet operates out of. What we are doing, ladies and gentlemen, we are sacrificing liberty. And tonight, instead of talking about all those technocrat things, all those facts and figures, I don't need to talk to you about Dodd-Frank and what it's doing to decimate small community banks, which affects our small businesses. You know that. But I want you to understand what we have to start learning to do as Republicans. We have to talk to the heart. We have to talk to people and get them to understand what it means to serve, to sacrifice for one simple thing, and that is for liberty. And when we think about the person that we are here to honor tonight, when we think about this was the president, the first president of the Republican Party. Why was the Republican Party established in 1854? There's one single reason. So that Allen West can be standing before you. Articulate that. Shame on us for not being able to say that this party was established to break the physical bonds of enslavement. So why do we need the Republican Party today? We need the Republican Party to break the chains, the bonds of economic enslavement, so that we can once again reestablish that indomitable entrepreneurial spirit. So we can once again say to the American people, your rugged individualism, your investment, your ingenuity, your innovation will be rewarded. Liberty. we're going to talk about liberty. Because if we cannot talk about liberty to every single person in the United States of America, we might as well pack it up and give up this great nation. But I don't think you want to do that. Furthermore, I ain't gonna let you do it. And so I wanted to talk about a great quote. And you set the stage for me, and I appreciate you talking about Gettysburg, because this is going to be a history lesson tonight. There was a great quote that came from Abraham Lincoln, talking about the word liberty. He spoke at the Sanitary Fair, April the 18th, 1864, in Baltimore, Maryland. This is what Lincoln said. He said, "The world has never had a good definition of the word liberty. And the American people, just now, are much in want of one. We all declare for liberty, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing. With some, the word liberty may mean for each man to do as he pleases with himself and the product of his labor. While with others, the same word may mean some men to do as they please with other men and the product of other men's labor. Here are two not only different, but incompatible things called by the same name, liberty. And it follows that each of the things is, by respective parties, called by two different and incompatible names. One liberty and one tyranny. See, if we cannot explain to the American people right now the difference between being able to do what you please with yourself and the fruits of your labor, as opposed to somebody else sitting far away in the state capitol of Washington, or in the state capitol, the federal capitol in Washington, D.C., and they're the ones deciding what should be done with you. They're the ones that are deciding what should be done, the product of your labor. We can't get the American people to see right now that we are standing on the precipice of losing that thing which so many of these men and women have fought for since the Minutemen answered the call of Lexington and Concord till today. It's liberty, as opposed to tyranny. That's why we rose up against the British, because we did not believe we had to wait for someone to give us their buy or their leave for us to be able to go in our own existence. But the exact same thing is happening today, when the government is controlling your thoughts, what you can eat, what your children can eat. People want to measure your children. And even to include what you're grilling in your backyard. This is how the citizen has become. So if we cannot talk about what liberty means and the elevation of the individual, because when you talk about the Declaration of Independence, it talks about the individual rights, the inalienable rights, and the important thing that Jefferson laid down in the inalienable rights is that they come from a creator. They don't come from man. Because if they came from man, then man can therefore also take away what he has granted. I believe it was Thomas Jefferson said, beware of a government that is big enough to give you everything that you want, because that government can also take it all away. See, we are moving away from the liberty of the individual to the tyranny of the collective. That's why you hear the other side talk about 1% versus 99%, war on women, blacks versus whites, straights versus gay, whatever they can do to get you into a collective grouping so that they can pit you against each other. How many of y'all remember the old Star Trek series with Jean-Luc Picard? Episode #1. Remember the Borg? You will assimilate. You will be part of the collective. 7 of 9, 9 of 12. That's what's happening. There is no more regard of the individual. We're all just something that has to be plugged into a bigger machine. That's the difference between liberty and tyranny. The difference between liberty and tyranny, as it states in those inalienable rights that you have as an individual in the Declaration of Independence, is that you have a pursuit of happiness. That's your liberty. But there are some people that believe that they can guarantee your happiness. There are some people that sit around and say, oh, no, Alan West, you were born in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia. You're probably not going to be able to stand in front of the incredible people at the Snohomish GOP Lincoln Day dinner in 2015. Just give you enough so that you can get by. We will give you a substandard education. We will make sure that you can have this Section 8 housing. You know, we will make sure you get some type of check. And even if you don't want to be responsible, you can go out there and make all kind of babies. Don't worry about it. You don't have to be responsible. We'll give the girls the check for having all the babies. We will try to guarantee their happiness. That is tyranny, ladies and gentlemen. And see, my mother taught me a very simple thing. I want to share with you. Self-esteem only comes from doing esteemable things. When you pursue your happiness, you will get self-esteem. When you have someone trying to guarantee your happiness, you will not have any esteem whatsoever. And that is the difference between the individual and the pursuit of happiness and the empowerment that we have. Because I remember in reading, I can't imagine the great people as we expanded westward, and they came upon the Mississippi River, and they turned around and said, okay, who's going to build us a bridge? What do you mean? I got a hot buffalo. Where's my wick? That's not who we are. That's not what we are about. When someone once said, go westward, we said, okay. We're going to follow that dream. We're going to pursue that happiness. But see, when you don't have the pursuit, when you have a guarantee, when you're lumped into a collective, when all of a sudden people are telling you that this is what you're going to get, that's not empowerment, ladies and gentlemen. Right. That's not liberty. That's enslavement. And that's the exact reason why this party was established, so that there would not be enslavement in the United States of America, so that those words of Thomas Jefferson, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Those are empowering words. Those are not enslaving words. If we can't make that case in America in 2015, then what do we do? If we respect the individual, we believe in liberty, we believe in empowerment, and we believe in promoting the pursuit of happiness, then we're talking about opportunity. We're talking about opportunity that says, no matter where you're born, no matter where you come from, in the United States of America, you can achieve whatever levels of success that you want in your heart's desire. You have that drive. You have that determination. You should have that will. The most important thing about opportunity is a good quality education. That's why my parents made a choice in my life. They did not send me to the public school in the old Fourth Ward of the inner city. They sent me to a private black Catholic school, Our Lady of Lourdes, at the intersection of Boulevard and Auburn Avenue. Guess what was right across the street from my elementary school? Ebenezer Baptist Church. Every single day of my life, I saw the man who said this one simple phrase that I will never forget. He dreamed about a time when a person like me would be judged by the content of his character, not the color of his skin, because he believed in the opportunity society. He did not believe in the dependency society, which is when you go to all the inner cities in the United States of America, you don't see opportunity, you see dependency. And that is the story of what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, that no one on our side has the courage to stand up and say. Black man without any opportunity woke up and decided that he was going to go to a store, not go to a store for his little part-time job, but go to a store to rob and assault the store owner. And with such lack of regard and respect, he assaulted a police officer. That's what you get when you have a dependency society. And even more so, that's what you get when you have people that are focused on color of skin and not content of character. Right. That starts at 1600 Pennsylvania. If you talk about the individual, if you talk about liberty, if you talk about empowerment, if you talk about opportunity, if you're talking about one simple thing, you're talking about making victors. The other side, tyranny. Guarantee of happiness, the collective, the enslavement, the dependency, does not talk about making victors, it talks about making victims. That's a very simple thing that we should say. Why is it that here in Seattle, you have the loudest, I mean the loudest, fans in the National Football League? You want to win, right?
Yeah.
Well, why is it that you're one of the most liberal cities in the United States? This is the juxtaposition. Why is it that you go to a game and you cheer for your team to win, but yet you don't cheer for your own city? You don't cheer for your own country to win? Why is it that you want to relegate the individuals on the football field to success, to score a touchdown, but yet you would rather have people in your city, in your state, in your country sit on the sidelines and wait for somebody to go out and score the touchdown for them? That is the difference. That's what we should be talking about. How dare you scream and cheer here on a Saturday or a Sunday at the UW Stadium or there in Central League Stadium. But then when it comes to Monday through Friday, you're not cheering. You're seeking every single way that you don't create victors, you create victims. That's the incredible perplexion that we see. Every single inner city where you have an NFL team, people are going out and cheering for success. But then when they go on Monday, they're not cheering for success. That's what we should be talking about. See, it comes down to this. Do we want to have a state of productivity? Or do we want to have a welfare state? And we're getting close to that tipping point, ladies and gentlemen, that Alexis de Tocqueville talked about in the book Democracy in America, when he said, back in the 1830s, a democracy cannot last as a permanent form of government. It can only last until a certain point, when the electorate realizes they can vote their own largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, voters will always vote for the person that promises them the most benefits, with the ensuing result being the collapse of the democracy over loose fiscal policy, followed by a dictatorship. You tell me that's not where we are right now in the United States of America. You tell me that this country cannot have a GDP of more than about 2.2%, which is what just came out today in the recent GDP report. Because we are not respecting the individual and their productivity. What we'd rather do, instead of creating victors, is create victims. What we'd rather do is enslave the individual so that they can be dependent upon the federal government instead of unleashing them. Every single one of you can make that case. You don't have to be a genius. Hell, I went to the University of Tennessee, you know. I jumped out of airplanes for a living. I couldn't fly a damn airplane if I tried. When I got in the other line, it was red light, green light. That's easy. Red light, you stay in the airplane. Green light, you get out. But if you can't make this case, then what are we going to pass on to subsequent generations? And see, this is why Snohomish County is so important here in the state of Washington. 39 counties, 33 are red, about 4 or so purple, right? And then the other 2 or whatever, blue. 33 red, 3 or 4 or so purple, the other 2 blue.
Amen, we are.
This is the story of Gettysburg. And I thank you, sir, for setting this up, because if it had not been for this, there would not have been a speech at Gettysburg. In that incredible battle, July the 1st through the 3rd, 1863, when Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia snuck in across the Blue Ridge Mountains and invaded into Pennsylvania, and General J.N.L. Buford of the Cavalry of the Army of the Potomac spotted the main body. And he decided that he had to save the Army of the Potomac so they would not be captured. He found that piece of high ground that they could hold and engage Lee at a place called Gettysburg. On the first day, Buford's cavalry was pushed back, but it was an incredible military maneuver. It was a delaying action because he fought a forward defense, because he knew as he got pushed back, he would get pushed back onto that high ground of Cemetery Ridge, while the Confederates occupied Seminary Ridge. And the Army of the Potomac joined up with him. And Lee thought that they had been successful in that first day in pushing the cavalry back, and he said, we will continue to attack them here. And on day 2, as the Union forces formed what was to be called the fish hook. It was centered around Culp's Hill, all the way down Cemetery Ridge, down to a place called Little Round Top. And there was a professor of rhetoric from Bowdoin College, Maine, not a professional military officer, but a man who felt in his heart that he had to go and serve his nation and fight, and not allow other people to fight. A man that believed in that cause of liberty and freedom. A man that believed that people should not be enslaved because of the color of their skin. And he stood there with his depleted little 20th Maine Regiment. He was told one simple thing: you're the end of the line. You cannot retreat. You cannot surrender. Because if you do, the entire Army of the Potomac will collapse. And there stood Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain on Little Round Top on July the 2nd of 1863, a hot summer day. The Alabamans and the Texans came at him under the command of John Bell Hood. They fought through Devil's Den, and they routed the Union forces out of Devil's Den, and they set their heights on Little Round Top because Lee said, if we can turn their flank, we will take the entire military, the entire Army of the Potomac. The Civil War would take a different path. The Union would be defeated, casualties mounted, running out of ammunition, to the point where they were completely out of ammunition. He refused the line as he saw the Confederates trying to sweep his flank. But then he realized that there was only one last thing to do. Chamberlain gave a one-word order that had never been given in the entire Union Army to that point in the Civil War, when he said, bayonets. And after fixing bayonets, the 20th Maine Regiment charged down Little Round Top. Snohomish County, you're Little Round Top. You cannot retreat. You cannot surrender. You must stand on this ground, because if you are going to be capable of winning the state of Washington, if you are going to be an impact player for the state of Washington and for these great United States of America, this constitutional republic of 2016, no retreat, no surrender. You must understand that it stops right here. You must take this county and push it to that other column. Because if you can push this county to the other column, this man here could be governor one day. Yeah. If you can push this county to another column, we may have a resounding success in the presidential election of 2016. 2012, Mitt Romney won 73% of the counties in the United States of America. 73% of the counties in the United States of America. President Obama won about 27%, but yet he had over close to 330 electoral college votes. Landslide. 27% of the counties in the United States of America determined who would be president in the United States of America. Where are those 27% of the counties located? Centered around. If we can't take our message of liberty versus tyranny, if we can't take our message of the pursuit of happiness versus the guarantee of happiness, if we can't take our message of empowering an individual instead of enslaving the individual to the subjugation of the collective, if we can't take our message about making people victors, not victims, then they have the battlefield calculus.
Amen.
They know what state to go into, they know what county to go into, they know what precinct to go into. Be Chamberlain. Stand up on your little round top here in Snohomish County. I'll be watching you. And you know one thing? I know you're not going to disappoint me. But even more so, you're not going to disappoint those 4 young girls who marched in here carrying our flag of this great state and the flag of the United States of America. God bless you all. that's the difference between liberty and tyranny.
One quick one before, I need some hands up here so I can make it to all the aspects of the room. I'll ask one while I'm on my way. What is the president's foreign policy right now?
Let me see if I can speed dial the White House and ask him. He doesn't have one.
That's right.
He really doesn't. And let me put it in perspective. 12 years ago, I was in Tikrit, Iraq. So today, the United States of America is flying combat missions, dropping bombs to support an Iraqi army that's being aided by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Al-Quds, and Shia militia in Tikrit. While we are now also aiding and supporting Sunni Arab countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia against Iranian-backed rebels in Yemen. While we're also getting ready to go into negotiations and finalize a deal to allow Iran to have a nuclear device.
Schizophrenic.
It is beyond schizophrenic. We went in and we toppled a dictator in Libya who told us, you know, if you leave me alone, I'll help you fight Al-Qaeda, who had given up his nuclear weapons, and now we have ISIS having a sanctuary in Libya. It is non-existent. It is basically what I think they said, don't do stupid blue. But they're doing a lot of stupid blue. And that's why the next president of the United States of America is going to have to truly be a commander-in-chief. We cannot afford to have more on-the-job training and discovery learning with the most important title of the president. You can get all kinds of smart people to help you fix the economy, help fix the energy situation, help fix healthcare. But there's only one person that sits in a room with really bad people and looks at them eyeball to eyeball and makes them stand down. Remember when Ronald Reagan stood and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall?
Amen.
Compare that to someone on the stage with then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev leaning over and saying, after the election, I'll have more flexibility. Now you know what flexibility is. We need someone that will be the exemplary presentation of American strength, might, and exceptionalism, because that's all some people understand.
Will you run?
I'm a Jew, and his policy is, I hate the Jews. Not yours, Obama's.
Oh, I was about to say, man, I was freaking out.
Obama does not stand with Israel, our strongest ally in the Middle East.
Well, that's pretty evident when you send someone, your campaign team over there to help undermine, your best ally's election. But even more so, after he wins, the petulant and petty reaction and response, where you even say that, we're considering going to the United Nations Security Council, withdrawing our veto, so that we would have a two-state solution. There's no two-state solution. Unless you just go back to say Israel and Jordan, which was the original two-state solution. But unless you have a willing peace partner on the other side, Hamas is not a willing peace partner, Islamic Jihad is not a willing peace partner, Fatah is not a willing peace partner. They don't even recognize Israel's existence.
Exactly.
If you give up the West Bank, you know what the narrowest point of Israel becomes? 7 miles. I can tell you that I stood there and I looked down on the entire fertile plain, the industrial valley. Now, I was an artillery guy. 7 miles, that's easy. I can put a gun up there and I can just make your day very bad. Okay? And that's exactly what's going to happen. They'll put mortars up there, they'll put rockets up there, and it's over. We should be standing with Israel. We should send a very clear message.
I'm from Mississippi, and I consider it an honor that you thought we were having a date tonight.
You see the same hat on the dude?
I've been married to my wonderful husband, who's Italian, for 42 years. And we're worried about what's happening in America. We're actually really concerned about who in Washington, D.C. will have the balls to stand up to this man.
I'll tell you what, you are from Mississippi. You shouldn't have that whatsoever.
Yeah. And they know it. I talk like I'm think, okay? So who in Washington DC is going to be able to stand up to this jerk?
Well, you know what? September the 17th, 1787, you all know what day that was? Constitution Day.
Yes.
On Constitution Day, Benjamin Franklin walked out of Independence Hall. He was met by a Philadelphia socialite, a woman by the name of Mrs. Powell. Mrs. Powell asked one simple question. She said, well, doctor, what is it that we have? A republic or a monarchy? Franklin replied, a republic if you can keep it. So let's stop asking about what someone else is going to do. What are we going to do? What are we going to do in our own houses? Let me tell you one of the most important things. Adults need to start being adults. Parents need to start being parents, okay? When you come into my house, it's my rules because it's my house. It's my roof that you're under. And you're going to hear about conservative principles. And we're not doing that. Okay? Look at some of the mess that is going on. You see Irvine, we're going to ban the American flag, things of this nature. It's not about the people that we send up to Washington, D.C. who are truly let down. The United States of America, and I'm going to see Kathy McMorris Rogers, and I'm going to tell her a few things.
Please do! Yay! Thank you!
There is no way that we should have funded an unconstitutional executive action by the President of the United States.
Right.
It should have been very easy to make this case. Article 1, Section 8, Clause number 4 of the Constitution says that only the Congress can deal in rules and matters on naturalization. The President said 22 times plus that he couldn't do it. A federal judge said he could not do it. If we could not explain to the American people that we're going to fund the Department of Homeland Security, we're not going to use your taxpayer dollars to do something that's unconstitutional. If you can't make that case to the American people, then maybe the American people should not be sending you back up there.
Right on.
So the question is, what are you going to do to keep this republic? Don't start looking at these other people. You got to start educating the electorate. We have an electorate that has been, I'll be very honest, dumbed down. We have an education system that is not educating, it is indoctrinating. And we have to change that.
Yes.
Two more questions, right? Two more, is that cool? Yeah. Yes, I gotta go to Sparky over here. He's got this red leather jacket, man. That dude is hip, man.
This lady has a pink jacket. I mean, how does this... What's the deal with you, gentlemen? The ladies first here. Come on.
All right, go. Let's go.
Do you believe, or do you agree that if America has turned her face away from God, and that if we turn our face back to God again, we'll be on a stronger path?
The Judeo-Christian faith heritage is integral into who we are as the United States of America. When people start to talk about separation of church and state, we have to challenge them and ask them, where is that written in any of our founding documents? It's not in the Declaration, not in the Federal Statement, it's not in the Constitution. It was just a simple letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Convention, basically saying, number one, we would not have an established religion, but number two, we would not have government establishing people to have a mandatory following to a religion. And number three, we would not have a head of state, who would be a head of church. Now all of a sudden people are talking about separation of church and state to mean that we're separating our faith heritage away from who we are. When I grew up in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia, before a high school football game that we had there, some local pastor would come out and give a prayer. I don't remember catastrophic injuries. I remember us praying in our schools. I don't remember a lot of the mess. I don't remember metal detectors, and I grew up in the inner city. You know, my school, the University of Tennessee, still to this day, does a prayer before a home football game. I went back for the Tennessee-Alabama game, same thing, did a prayer. And there was this group out of Wisconsin, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, that actually sent a letter to the University of Tennessee, my alma mater, said, you will cease and desist this prayer thing. Who the hell are these people from Wisconsin? We need to make that stand. Now, I will close by saying this. How many of you have ever been in the chamber of the House of Representatives? You know that across the upper area are the faces of all the great lawmakers in history. There's only one full face of a lawmaker. And that full face stares back at the Speaker's rostrum. So when the Speaker is there, the President of the United States is there, giving the State of the Union address, they're looking at that one singular face. Who's that face? It's Moses.
Moses. Amen.
I rest my case.
It's an honor to meet you today. Part of my background is broadcasting, and one of the biggest challenges I think we have as party, regardless of whether you're ultra-conservative or moderate, is communication.
We're horrible.
Our national networks suck. With the exception of Fox.
You're talking about sucking. We're not a G-rated show anymore here.
I have advertising clients all over the West Coast, and I tell everyone I'm supposed to be impartial, but I'm not. I advertise heavily on CBS stations all over the West Coast, ABC, NBC. They are so biased in their reporting, either by yellow journalism, sensationalism, or lack of reporting. It is difficult for a good man like yourself to get a message across.
I totally disagree.
Why?
You know why? Because, you know, I have a Facebook page where 1.5 million people follow me. Half a million people on Twitter. We have to learn to leverage all of these different aspects of communication mediums, the social media and everything. You know, there's power in that. Most people are not looking at mainstream media news anymore. They're losing market share. As a matter of fact, MSNBC is bleeding so bad. They're talking about bringing on conservative commentators. You know, when you tell people clear delineation between liberty and tyranny, think about this. Jimmy Carter, if you're cold in your house, put on a sweater.
Yeah. Yep.
The malaise of Jimmy Carter.
Was there.
And then that incredible communicative skill and exceptionalism of Ronald Reagan to talk about how it's morning in America, shining city that sits upon a hill. We don't win when we're a lesser version of the other side. When we make a clear delineation, you end up doing like Reagan did in one of his elections. He won 49 out of 50 states. 49 out of 50. The only state that never voted for Ronald Reagan in his election and re-election, Minnesota. It's the Viking people. There's something wrong with them. They like Jesse Ventura and Al Franken. So, you know, I just Minnesota. Okay? But the American people understand what is right and what is wrong. And there was a group of folks that you're never going to get them to believe in, you know, conservative principles, limited government, fiscal responsibility, individual sovereignty, free market, strong national defense. I don't know why, but they can't make a case against it. We don't win if we're on defense. You show me a battle in the history of the United States of America where someone won being on defense. Even Chamberlain did a bayonet charge. He didn't stay on Little Round Top. He charged down. We have to go on offense. Make them defend who they are, what they believe in, instead of making us stand up and say,